The sound of laughter echoed through the apartment hallway, but it wasn't the kind that brought joy. Cassandra Mitchell stood frozen outside her boyfriend's door, keys trembling in her hand. Through the slightly open window, she could hear Jonathan's voice mingling with another woman's giggles. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed the door open, hoping against hope that her mind was playing tricks on her. The sight that greeted her shattered every dream she had carefully built over the past 4 years. Jonathan lay tangled in silk sheets with a woman she recognized from his office. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. For years of faithful devotion, of saving herself for marriage, of believing in the pure love he claimed to cherish, all of it crumbled in that single moment. The walk of the broken Cass stumbled backward, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't demand explanations. Instead, she quietly closed the door and walked away, her world tilting on its axis. The busy streets of downtown seemed to mock her pain as she wandered aimlessly, her mind replaying every sweet word Jonathan had whispered, every promise he had made. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she found herself in the bustling market district. Vendors called out their wares, children chased each other between stalls, and couples walked hand in hand. Everyone seemed to be living in a different universe, one where love was real and promises were kept. Cass felt like a ghost among the living, invisible in her grief. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages, probably from Jonathan trying to explain or apologize. She turned it off without reading them. What excuse could possibly justify what she had seen? What words could heal a heart that had been torn apart so completely? A moment of madness lost in her thoughts and blinded by tears, Cass didn't see the ornate lamppost until she walked straight into it. The impact sent her stumbling backward, stars dancing before her eyes. Sharp pain shot through her forehead, and she felt the warm trickle of blood. For a moment, she just sat on the sidewalk, holding her head, and then something unexpected happened. "Oh!" She began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle but grew into full-blown laughter that echoed through the street. Passersby stared at the young woman sitting on the ground, laughing hysterically with blood on her forehead. To them, she must have looked unhinged, but to Cass, it felt like the only sane response to an insane day. Standing up on shaky legs, she made her way to a nearby cafe and claimed a small table outside. The waiter brought her ice for her forehead and cast worried glances in her direction. Cass caught her reflection in the window and almost laughed again. Her usually neat brown hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and a purple bruise was already forming where she had hit the post. The desperate plan as she sat there nursing her wounded pride and throbbing head. A wild idea began to form. Jonathan had always been proud of his conquests, always boasting about his charm and success with women. The thought of him bragging about how easily he had fooled her made her stomach turn. What if she could show him that she wasn't just some naive girl to be discarded? What if she could prove that she was worth more than his casual betrayal? "I need to find someone amazing," she muttered to herself, dabbing at her cut with a napkin. "Someone who will make Jonathan realize what he lost." Her eyes began scanning the pedestrians walking past the cafe. Each man became a potential candidate. In her desperate scheme, the businessman in the expensive suit looked promising until she noticed him checking out every woman who passed. The artist with paint-stained fingers seemed sensitive, but something about his nervous energy reminded her too much of Jonathan's restless nature. Then she saw him, the mysterious stranger. He emerged from the upscale jewelry boutique across the street, moving with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, and his dark hair was styled with casual precision. But it wasn't his obvious wealth or good looks that caught her attention. It was the way he moved, purposeful, yet unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. More importantly, he was alone. No wedding ring glinted on his finger. No woman clung to his arm. He was perfect for her plan, even if she couldn't see his face clearly from this distance. Without giving herself time to think about how insane her idea was, Cass stood up and crossed the street. Her heart pounded as she approached him. But she forced herself to smile brightly despite her bruised forehead and tear-stained cheeks. This was it. Her chance to turn this horrible day around, to prove to herself and Jonathan that she wasn't just some discarded toy. The impossible proposal, excuse me, she called out, stepping directly into his path. I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider marrying me? The man stopped abruptly, his piercing blue eyes widening in surprise. Up close, he was even more handsome than she had thought, with strong features and an air of quiet authority that made her knees feel weak. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Cass wondered if she had finally lost her mind completely. I'm sorry, what did you just say? His voice was deep and smooth, with the kind of cultured accent that spoke of private schools and old money. I asked if you would marry me, Cass repeated, lifting her chin defiantly. I know we don't know each other, but sometimes the best relationships start with the most unexpected beginnings. The stranger studied her face intently, his gaze lingering on her bruised forehead and the determined set of her jaw. Instead of laughing or walking away as any reasonable person would, he seemed to be actually considering her proposal. The silence stretched between them, filled with the noise of the busy street and the wild beating of her heart. The unexpected yes, all right, said simply, his lips curving into a small smile. I accept. Cass blinked rapidly, certain she had. Miss Heard, you accept? Just like that? Just like that, he confirmed, extending his hand toward her. I'm Nathaniel Stone. And you are? Cassandra Mitchell, she managed, shaking his warm, strong hand. But everyone calls me Cass. Are you sure about this? You don't even know me. Sometimes the heart knows things that the mind hasn't figured out yet, Nathaniel replied mysteriously. Besides, you look like someone who needs a friend right now. Before Cass could process what was happening, Nathaniel was leading her to a nearby bench and pulling out his phone. He made a quick call, speaking in low tones to someone about bringing something to the market square. Within minutes, a well-dressed man in a black suit appeared, carrying a small velvet box and what looked like a first aid kit. Sir, the man said respectfully, handing over both items before disappearing as quickly as he had come. The ring and the promised Nathaniel opened the first aid kit and gently cleaned the cut on Cass's forehead, his touch surprisingly tender for someone she had just met. Then he opened the velvet box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, with a brilliant center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. This ring has been waiting for the right person, he said softly, sliding it onto her finger. I think it's found its home. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Cass stared at it in amazement, unable to believe that this was really happening. Just hours ago, she had been planning a future with Jonathan. Now she was wearing a stranger's ring and feeling more cherished than she had in years. Nathaniel, she whispered, testing his name on her tongue. This is all so surreal. Are you real? He laughed, a rich sound that made something warm unfurl. In her chest, I'm as real as you are, Cassandra Mitchell. And this ring, this moment, this promise between us, it's all real too. Fragments of memory as the afternoon wore on. They sat together on that bench, talking about everything and nothing. Nathaniel bought her coffee and pastries from a nearby vendor, listening intently as she told him about her work as a kindergarten teacher and her love of old movies. He shared stories of his travels and business ventures, though he was vague about the details of his wealth. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of her memory, like a half-remembered dream. The way he smiled when she laughed, the gentle way he had tended to her injury, even the pet name he had started using, Little Star, felt like echoes from another time. Have we met before? She asked suddenly, studying his face in the golden light of the setting sun. Nathaniel's expression grew thoughtful, almost wistful. Perhaps in another life, he said softly. Or perhaps we're just two souls who were always meant to find each other. The answer wasn't really an answer, but something in his tone made her stop pressing. Whatever connection she felt to this stranger, it was growing stronger by the minute. The pain of Jonathan's betrayal seemed like a distant memory, replaced by something bright and hopeful that she was afraid to name, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Cass realized that her impulsive proposal might have been the Best decision she had ever made. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she was excited to find out. Dawn crept through the curtains of Cass's small apartment, painting golden streaks across the wooden floor. She lay in bed, staring at the ring that sparkled on her finger like a captured piece of starlight. The events of yesterday felt like a vivid dream, but the weight of the diamond and the tender ache in her forehead proved it had all been real. Nathaniel Stone had given her his number and promised to call. Part of her wondered if she would ever see him again. Her phone buzzed, with a text message that made her heart skip. "Good morning, little star. I hope you slept well. Would you like to have breakfast with your fiancé?" The formality, mixed with warmth, made her smile despite herself. This mysterious man who had agreed to marry a stranger was nothing like anyone she had ever met. They arranged to meet at a small diner downtown, the kind of place that served coffee in thick white mugs and had checkered tablecloths. When Cass arrived, she found Nathaniel already waiting in a corner booth, looking oddly out of place in his expensive clothes among the truck drivers and early morning workers. Yet he seemed completely comfortable, reading a newspaper and sipping coffee as if million-dollar business deals and impromptu engagements were perfectly normal occurrences. "Questions without answers you came," he said, standing to greet her with a gentle kiss on her uninjured cheek. The gesture felt natural, as if they had been together for years instead of hours. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Cass slid into the booth across from him, accepting the coffee he had already ordered for her. He had somehow known she liked it black, with just a touch of cream. "I thought you might wake up and realize you had proposed to a complete stranger," Nathaniel admitted, his blue eyes studying her face. "Most people would call that temporary insanity." "Ow!" Cass laughed, touching the tender spot on her forehead. "Maybe. I did hit my head harder than I thought. But here I am wearing your ring and having breakfast with my mysterious fiancés. Speaking of which, you never did tell me what you do for a living." A shadow crossed Nathaniel's features, so brief she almost missed it. "I'm in the jewelry business," he said simply. "Import and export, mostly. Nothing too exciting." "Ow." The answer felt rehearsed, like something he had said many times before. Cass sensed there was more to the story, but something in his manner discouraged further questions. Instead, she found herself telling him about her students, about the little girl who brought her dandelions every day, and the boy who insisted on calling her Princess Cass. "Princess Cass," Nathaniel repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. It suits you." There it was again, that strange sense of familiarity. The way he said her name, the half-smile that played at the corners of his mouth, even the way he stirred his coffee in slow, deliberate circles. Cass felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. An unexpected journey after breakfast, Nathaniel surprised her by suggesting they take a drive. "There's something I want to show you," he said, leading her to a sleek black car that probably cost more than she made in 2 years. "It's about an hour outside the city." The countryside rolled past in shades of green and gold, farmland stretching toward distant hills. Cass found herself relaxing for the first time since discovering Jonathan's betrayal. There was something soothing about Nathaniel's presence, a quiet strength that made her feel safe without being overwhelming. "Where are we going?" she asked, as they turned onto a gravel road lined with ancient oak trees. "Home," Nathaniel said softly, but when she looked at him questioningly, he just smiled and kept driving. The road wound through rolling pastures where cattle grazed peacefully, past red barns and farmhouses with wraparound porches. It was beautiful, in a way that spoke to something deep in Cass's soul, though she couldn't remember ever visiting this area before. When they finally stopped in front of a weathered wooden gate, she felt a strange flutter of recognition. The place where dreams began. Beyond the gate lay a valley dotted with wildflowers, a small creek meandering through stands of willow trees. An old farmhouse sat on a gentle rise, its white paint peeling but its bones still strong. Nathaniel helped her over the gate, his hand warm and steady in hers. "This is where I grew up," he said, leading her down a path worn smooth by years of footsteps. "My family had a small farm here. We raised vegetables and kept a few chickens. It wasn't much, but it was home." Cass walked beside him in silence, drinking in the peaceful beauty of the place. There was something achingly familiar about the way the light fell through the leaves, about the sound of water over stones. When they reached the creek, she knelt and dipped her fingers in the cool water, a memory tugging at the edges of her consciousness. "I know this place," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Nathaniel knelt beside her, his voice gentle when he spoke. "Do you remember the little girl who used to play here?" She had brown hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She used to chase fireflies at dusk and make wishes on dandelions. The world seemed to tilt around Cass as the memories came flooding back. Summer afternoons spent waiting in this very creek, building fairy houses from twigs and leaves, sharing secrets with her best friend. A boy with serious blue eyes and gentle hands who caught tadpoles for her and taught her to whistle. Nathan, she breathed, her childhood nickname for him falling from her lips like a prayer. "Oh my God, Nathan, is it really you?" The boy who became a manna. Nathaniel's face transformed as the years fell away, revealing glimpses of the boy she had loved with all her 8-year-old heart. "Hello, Starlight," he said, using the special name he had given her all those years ago. "I've been waiting for you." The tears came then, years of grief and confusion and loneliness pouring out of her, like water from a broken dam. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. And she felt like she was finally coming home after being lost for decades. "But you disappeared," she choked out between tears. "One day you were here, and the next, you were gone. No goodbye, no explanation. I waited for you, Nathan. I waited and waited." "I know," he murmured into her hair. "My father lost the farm. I had to leave in the middle of the night to avoid the debt collectors. I wanted to say goodbye, wanted to explain, but there wasn't time. I was just a kid. Starlight. I had no choice." The full picture began to emerge. After his family left, Nathan had worked every job he could find, saving every penny while putting himself through school. He had started with nothing and built a jewelry empire through sheer determination and an artist's eye for beauty. Every piece he designed, every business decision he made, had been driven by a single goal: to become worthy of the girl who had promised to wait for him. Promises remembered, they walked hand in hand to the old farmhouse, its empty windows staring out over the valley like sad eyes. The porch where they used to sit and plan their futures was sagging now. But Cass could still see them as children, legs swinging from the edge as they shared dreams that seemed impossibly far away. "You said you would marry me when we grew up," Nathan said, settling beside her on the weathered steps. "I know we were just kids, but I never forgot. Every woman I met, I compared to you. Every ring I designed, I imagined placing on your finger." Cass looked down at the magnificent ring that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Now she understood why it had fit so perfectly, why it had seemed made for her hand. It had been 20 years, she whispered. "You waited 20 years. I would have waited forever," Nathan replied simply. "But when I saw you yesterday, standing in that street, looking so lost and broken, I knew fate was giving us a second chance. I couldn't let you walk away again." The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. His mysterious wealth, the way he had appeared so quickly with the ring, even his easy acceptance of her crazy proposal. He had been planning for this moment for 2 decades, carrying her memory like a torch through every success and failure. The child's promise, kept as the sun began to set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Cass's breath catch. It was a photograph, old and creased from years of handling, showing 2 children grinning at the camera. She was missing her 2 front teeth, and he had a Band-Aid on his knee from some long-forgotten adventure. "I've carried this everywhere," he said softly. "Through college, through business meetings, through every lonely night in hotel rooms around the world. You were my constant starlight, my guiding star." Cass took the photograph with trembling fingers, remembering the day it was taken. They had been 9 years old, posing for his mother's old camera after a day spent building a fort in the woods. That night, they had made their most solemn promise, sealing it with a kiss on her cheek and a dandelion ring he had woven for her finger. "I promised you a real ring someday," Nathan continued, his voice thick with emotion. I promised you a house where we could be happy, a life where you would never want for anything. I know I'm 20 years late, but I'm here now. Will you still have me, Starlight? Will you let me keep my promises? Coming home instead of answering with words, Cass leaned forward and kissed him. Tasting salt from her own tears and feeling the solid warmth of the man who had once been her dearest friend. When they broke apart, both of them were crying, 20 years of separation dissolving in the magic of found love. I never stopped loving you, she whispered against his lips. Even when I couldn't remember your face, even when I tried to move on with Jonathan, there was always this empty space in my heart. I thought I was broken, but I was just incomplete. They sat on that old porch until the stars came out, sharing stories of the years between, filling in the gaps that distance and time had created. Nathan told her about the nights he had driven past her apartment, wanting to approach but fearing. She had forgotten him. Cass confessed that she had kept a shoebox full of mementos from their childhood. Treasures she couldn't bear to throw away, even when she couldn't remember why they mattered. As the night deepened around them, they made new promises to replace the ones that time had tested. Tomorrow, they would start building the life they had dreamed of as children. But tonight, they were content to sit in the place where their love began. Watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness and knowing that some promises are worth waiting a lifetime to keep. The boy who had caught tadpoles and made dandelion crowns had become a man who moved mountains to keep his word. And the girl who had waited without knowing what she was waiting for had finally found her way home. The weeks following their reunion passed like a beautiful dream that Cass was afraid to wake from. Nathan had insisted she'd take time off from teaching to process everything that had happened, and he had temporarily moved his business operations to be closer to her. They spent their days rediscovering each other, walking through the places of their childhood and building new memories on the foundation of old ones. But as the initial euphoria began to settle, the reality of their vastly different worlds started to intrude. Nathan's phone rang constantly with calls from business associates, investors, and employees who needed his attention. Luxury cars appeared at Cass's modest apartment building, drawing curious stares from her neighbors. The simple life she had built for herself seemed fragile next to the empire he commanded. One morning, she watched him take yet another urgent call about a jewelry exhibition in Paris. Cass felt the first flutter of doubt. This man who had become her everything was also someone who owned factories, employed hundreds of people, and had responsibilities that stretched across continents. How could someone like her fit into that world? The proposal Nathan seemed to sense, her growing uncertainty, and 3 weeks after their reunion, he surprised her with a suggestion that took her breath away. They were sitting in her small kitchen, sharing breakfast and watching the morning news, when he suddenly turned off the television and took her hands in his. "Marry me," he said simply, his blue eyes serious and intent. Not because of childhood promises or romantic reunions, but because I cannot imagine spending another day without you as my wife. Marry me because we belong together, Starlight. We always have. Cass felt her heart stop and restart. The ring on her finger had been a symbol, a placeholder for possibilities. But this was real, immediate, permanent. "Nathan, I don't know if I can be what you need. Your world is so different from mine. I teach kindergarten children and live in a one-bedroom apartment. You run a multinational corporation. None of that matters," Nathan said firmly, bringing her hands to his lips. "The only thing that matters is this feeling between us, this connection that survived 20 years of separation. Everything else is just details we can work out together." He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I have a confession to make. I bought back the old farm. It's a whole valley, actually. I've been having it restored, not just as a memory, but as a home. Our home, if you'll have it." They returned to paradise that afternoon. Nathan drove her back to the valley, but this time, they didn't stop at the gate. The old farmhouse had been transformed into something magnificent, yet still authentically rural. The bones of the original structure remained, but every detail had been lovingly restored. The wraparound porch where they had made their childhood promises now gleamed with fresh white paint, and flower boxes overflowed with the wildflowers that had once grown freely in the meadows inside. The house was a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort. Wide plank wooden floors stretched through rooms filled with antique furniture and family photographs. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, and French doors opened onto a deck that overlooked the creek where they had played as children. "This is incredible," Cass whispered, running her fingers along the smooth banister of the restored staircase. "But Nathan, I could never afford anything like this. I wouldn't even know how to live in a place like this." Nathan caught her hand, spinning her around to face him. "You're not understanding me, Starlight. This isn't about what you can afford or what you think you deserve. This is about coming home. This house, this land, everything I've built, it's all meaningless without you in it." He led her to the master bedroom, where a wall of windows looked out over the valley they had explored as children. "I've spent 20 years building a fortune, and the only thing I've ever wanted to spend it on is making you happy. Let me do that. Let me give you the fairy tale we dreamed about when we were 9 years old." The simple wedding, they were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that perfectly captured who they were together. Instead of a grand cathedral or expensive resort, they chose the meadow beside the creek, the same spot where Nathan had once made her a crown of dandelions and declared her his princess. Cass wore her grandmother's wedding dress, a simple ivory gown that had been carefully preserved in tissue paper for 40 years. Nathan surprised her by wearing the same blue tie he had worn to their elementary school graduation, somehow preserved through all his travels and transformations. The guest list was small, but meaningful. Her parents, who had driven down from their retirement home, his mother, who had flown in from the assisted living facility where she now lived, and a handful of close friends who had supported them through the years. The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Miller, the same man who had baptized them both as infants in the little white church at the edge of town. He spoke about love that endures, about promises kept across time and distance, about the miracle of two hearts finding their way back to each other despite all obstacles. When Nathan slipped the wedding band onto her finger, nestling it perfectly against the engagement ring that had been designed specifically for her hand, Cass felt the last piece of her heart click into place. She was no longer the broken woman who had stumbled into a lamppost and proposed to a stranger. She was Starlight, beloved and cherished. Home at last, building a new life. The months that followed their wedding were a time of joyful adjustment as they learned to blend their different worlds. Nathan gradually shifted more of his business operations to allow him to work from home, conducting meetings via video conference and traveling only when absolutely necessary. He converted one wing of the farmhouse into a modern office, but he made sure to close the door at 5 o'clock each day to focus on his wife and their life together. Cass continued teaching, but now she drove to work from their beautiful valley home instead of her cramped apartment. Her students were fascinated by her transformation, constantly asking about her prince and begging for stories about the castle where she lived. She found herself bringing more magic into her classroom, inspired by the fairy tale her own life had become. Together, they created traditions that honored both their past and their future. Sunday mornings were spent at the creek, sometimes wading in the water like children, sometimes simply sitting on the bank and planning their dreams. They planted a vegetable garden where Nathan's family's farm had once flourished, growing tomatoes and corn and beans with their own hands despite having enough money to buy anything they wanted. The community embraces them. The local community, which had initially been wary of Nathan's wealth and influence, gradually came to accept and love the couple. Nathan used his resources to support local businesses and charities, but he did it quietly, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. He and Cass became regular fixtures at church suppers and town festivals, always ready to help with fundraisers or community projects. When the old elementary school where they had first met needed a new playground, Nathan funded the entire project but insisted that the equipment be installed by volunteers from the community. He and Cass spent 3 weekends helping to build swings and slides, their hands dirty and their hearts full as they created a place where future generations of children could make the same. Magical memories they had shared. The local newspaper ran a feature story about them, calling them a modern-day fairy tale. But what struck everyone who read it was how normal and grounded they seemed, despite Nathan's extraordinary wealth. They shopped at the same grocery store as everyone else, attended the same church services, and treated every person they met with the same kindness and respect. Challenges and growth, their life together, wasn't without challenges. Nathan struggled sometimes with the pace of small-town life after years of constant travel and high-stakes business deals. There were moments when Cass could see him itching for the excitement of international markets and million-dollar negotiations. Cass had her own adjustments to make. Learning to accept help from household staff, getting comfortable with the financial security Nathan provided, and dealing with the occasional gossip about their unusual love story, all required patience and grace. There were times when she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the life he had given her, wondering if she truly deserved such happiness. But they worked through each challenge together, always coming back to the fundamental truth that it brought them together. They were better as a team than they had ever been apart. Nathan's drive and ambition were tempered by Cass's gentle wisdom and grounding influence. Her tendency towards self-doubt was countered by his unwavering belief in her worth and value. The perfect ending one year after their wedding, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Inside the package was a simple dandelion, perfectly preserved in crystal. Attached was a small card that read, "Some wishes are worth waiting a lifetime to come true." Cass laughed through her tears, remembering all the dandelion wishes she had made as a child. Most of them somehow involving the boy who had just handed her the perfect symbol of dreams fulfilled. "How many of my wishes do you remember?" she asked. "All of them," Nathan replied, pulling her close. "I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure they all come true." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat together, in comfortable silence, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had never stopped sharing. The broken-hearted woman who had proposed to a stranger was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her way home to a love that had been waiting patiently for 20 years. Their story had started with betrayal and desperation, but it had become something beautiful and lasting. Sometimes the best fairy tales begin with the darkest moments, and sometimes the longest journeys are the ones that lead us back to where we started. To the people who have been in our hearts all along, in the distance, fireflies began their nightly dance, tiny lights flickering like fallen stars in the gathering dusk. And in the farmhouse that had become their castle, Cass and Nathan began writing the next chapter of their love story. One day at a time, one wish at a time, one perfectly kept promise at a time,